Alright, y'all. So, one team in this offseason who has been very frequently making moves and confusing a whole lot of NBA fans, myself included, is the Detroit Pistons. And I honestly, I lost track at one point, and luckily now the dust has settled, and I'm able to just look back and review over all the moves they've made. So I just wanted to make this video to help you guys and myself personally work through what exactly this Pistons roster is going to be looking like heading into the next offseason, because I actually think now that I've had the chance to look over all their moves in an entirety, I think they're in a much better place than they were entering free agency. So I have to give the Pistons some props on that. But without further ado, let's get into it. I'm going to start by talking about their top draft pick from the NBA draft, and Killian Hayes, who they took 7th overall. Now, I really loved Killian Hayes in the pre-draft time period, and another person who really loved him was Kevin O'Connor from The Ringer. He had him number 1 on his full draft board, and the Pistons getting him at 7th, it was a selection that I was hoping for a little bit, but to be honest, wasn't entirely ready for or thought it was coming. So I thought it was a great pick by the Pistons, because heading into this offseason, if you looked at that Detroit roster, there were just a lot of old, aging contracts and just not a lot of youth, not a lot of star potential. The only guy with any star potential was Blake Griffin, who was in and out of the lineup very frequently and all that stuff, and it's been used as a trade piece for the past couple of seasons now, as Detroit seems to be going nowhere. So to me at least, a huge key for the Pistons this offseason was to get younger and just get some guys who can maybe become stars caliber players a few years down the line. Take some chances, and I think they did a lot of that, especially with their draft pick in Killian Hayes. I agree with Kevin O'Connor in that I think Killian Hayes could easily be seen as one of, if not the best player from this draft class a few years down the line. He has all the tools to be that. Great playmaker, already has a deep bag of moves. I know overseas he showed off that he has a bit of that hardened step back in his game, and other than that, he can play solid team defense. He can score the ball very well. The only issues really is that he is not the most efficient player, although that's something that I think can be fixed as he just gets more and more time and experience in the NBA. And overall, there's going to be some growing pains, there's going to be some issues. That's the same for every single rookie. It might be a little bit more pronounced in Killian Hayes' game, but with him being in Detroit, I think he'll have plenty of opportunity to make mistakes and grow. And again, I think it was a great pick. I'm very excited to watch Killian Hayes and his career just unfold in front of our eyes. Now that we got that out of the way, I'm going to be digging into all of the trades and transactions and signings that the Pistons made, so bear with me as there are quite a few. Like I said, the Pistons were one of the busier teams in this offseason, so again, let's just dive in. So it all started with the Pistons trading Bruce Brown to the Brooklyn Nets for Janan Musa and a future second-round pick. Now, Bruce Brown was one of the younger guys on the last year's Pistons roster who actually had some good potential, but again, the Pistons timeline probably wasn't going to match with his career arc, so I understand dealing him away. In return, they get Musa, who's only 21 years old, which you're going to see age is a big theme in this video. But again, Musa has not shown much at all. He's barely shown any really talent to score or do anything that he was drafted to be by the Nets. But again, he's young. He still has plenty of time to figure it out. Hopefully he can maybe show off a bit more of a scoring threat as he maybe gets a few more possessions on a Pistons team that's not exactly trying to win right now. So again, he has some room to grow. Hopefully he does. Moving on from there, the Pistons trade a future first-round pick for Trevor Ariza and the 16th overall pick. And Ariza has since been traded, as we'll get to later in the video. But I want to talk about the 16th pick, who ended up being Isaiah Stewart. In Isaiah Stewart's lone season at Washington, he proved to be a great scoring threat in the paint. He has a big, wide frame, a strong guy, and he was able to just move at ease inside the paint and score at ease as well. The issues for Isaiah Stewart come on the defensive end, where I don't necessarily want to say that he lacks defensive skills, but again, this past season at Washington, he played as the center position in a zone, so his role was simplified a lot to just be a shot blocker and a rebounder, and a lot of the game was just able to develop out in front of him. Being the backline defense, he could see everything that was happening in front of him. So, it was a bit easier for him to play better defense. So we'll have to see how he adjusts to a more man-heavy NBA type defense. After that, we move into the 3-team trade that the Pistons made with the Los Angeles Clippers, and again involving the Brooklyn Nets, wherein the Pistons traded away Luke Kennard to the Clippers, and in return, they got the 19th pick and Rodney McGruder. Now, I was a little surprised that the Pistons let Kennard be traded away for, in my opinion, not too much. I think they could have gotten a little bit more for him, but I guess they did get a first-round pick and a rotational piece of McGruder. Although McGruder probably won't see the court that much for the Pistons, the 19th pick was used for Saddiq Bey, and I actually really like the Saddiq Bey pick for the Pistons. He doesn't necessarily fit the whole all-star potential type thing I was talking about earlier for the Pistons, but he is looking like he could be a great two-way player down the line. While in college, he showed that he could use his great size and length, as he has a very long wingspan at the forward spot, and he played some solid defense. Didn't necessarily get steals and deflections and all that good stuff, but he was able to be a good on-ball defender. And on the offensive end, he actually showed that he could be a good spot-up shooter and maybe even create off the dribble by himself. All in all, I think Saddiq Bey, with just a little bit of development and progress in his game on both sides of the floor, again, I think he could be a great two-way player down the line for the Pistons. Next trade we're going to, Jazz gave up Tony Bradley and the 38th pick for future picks from the Pistons. Now, Tony Bradley was, again, like Ariza, traded in a later date, so we'll be getting to that one. But the 38th pick I want to talk about quickly was Saben Lee, and he signed a two-way contract with the Pistons, so he probably won't be seeing a whole lot of time outside of maybe some injury replacements or other stuff like that. But Saben Lee was a junior point guard who showed that he could score the ball well and play some solid defense. So again, maybe he potentially sees some minutes if there's injuries or other trades or rotational type issues later in the season. But for now, probably won't be seeing too much of him, so we move. Next trade on the docket, the Pistons gave away Tony Snell and Kyrie Thomas for Dwayne Dedmon. So this trade was pretty much used to clear cap space for the future free agent signings that I'll be getting to in a little bit, as the Pistons brought on Dwayne Dedmon, who has since been stretched and waived, meaning that the money he was owed will be given to him, but just over a longer period of time. This clears up cap space for the Pistons, pretty much just easy as that. And with this newly acquired cap space, the Pistons decide to go out and sign Mason Plumlee to a 3-year, $25 million deal. Now, while Plumlee is definitely a serviceable backup center in this league, he offers you some great rim protection, some good rebounding, overall just a good hustle guy who, again, can just give you some spot-up rotational minutes. He did so with Nikola Jokic. Even we saw it in the playoffs last season for the Nuggets, and he played his role. He had a few mishaps here and there, specifically in the Lakers series and a certain final play that ended up being a Anthony Davis game winner. But I digress. Plumlee, like I said, he's a solid backup veteran center. I think the Pistons might have overpaid a little bit for him. 3 years, $25 million is a lot, but that also makes me think that he could just maybe be a trade piece, maybe this season or the next one, or just at some point in his contract, as he will be making $8 million about a year. So maybe he'll just be offered in as a little bit of a trade kicker. Pistons also signed Jahlil Okafor to a 2-year deal. No numbers were mentioned in the report. But again, Jahlil Okafor could probably just be their backup center to Mason Plumlee. Okafor gives you a bit more variance in his game, at least compared to Plumlee. Okafor, while he can also rebound, he's a bit more of a scoring threat than a defensive threat, so we'll probably see some sort of platoon between those two guys. Next up, the Pistons decided to take a flyer on Josh Jackson, and this is one of the moves that I before mentioned, in that the Pistons are finally getting some youth with some star potential. And while that star potential window may be closing on Josh Jackson, I still love the signing. He's not going to cost you too much, and he did show that he had some success for the Memphis G League last season, so hopefully he can finally convert some of that success into the NBA. Next signing was the big one for the Pistons this offseason, prying away Jerami Grant from Denver on a 3-year, $60 million deal. And I've been hearing a lot of mixed opinions about this deal. Jerami Grant making 20 mil a year, I think it's a pretty solid deal. Might even end up being a value signing for the Pistons. My only issue is that Jerami Grant's the type of player where, he did so well in Denver because he had Jokic and Jamal Murray in front of him, and you didn't have to rely on him necessarily to go out and produce. He could kind of just fit in the flow of the offense, flow of the defense, and make great plays where they needed to be. But with him being potentially the number one or number two guy in Detroit, I just don't know if they're going to get that same type of production from him, as there's just simply going to be more responsibilities falling on his shoulders, which I'm a little bit scared of and hesitant to. That's why I am hesitating to call this a great deal. I think the Pistons might just need some more talent around him, which might not come in his 3 years for the Pistons. So I like it. I like it as a signing for a smaller market team, but again, it might have just been a bit of an overpay. And I really don't want this video to go on for too long, so I'm just going to try and rifle through these last couple of moves for the Pistons and give a final synopsis. So here we go. As I mentioned, Trevor Ariza was later dealt, and he went to the Dallas Mavericks for DeLon Wright. I like DeLon Wright as a backup, combo guard off the bench. He can give you some scoring. He can play some solid defense. He's a fast guy. He can get out in transition. And again, I think it's a fine pickup. Definitely a younger option than Trevor Ariza, who would have just been, sitting on the bench rotting for the Pistons all year until he was eventually traded. So just to get that out of the way now. Tony Bradley was also acquired earlier in the offseason, and he has now been dealt to the Sixers for Zaire Smith. Again, similar to the Josh Jackson pickup, Zaire Smith only played in 13 games over 2 seasons for the Sixers due to injuries, but he's still only 21 years old. He came out of college as a great scoring option, an above-the-rim guard who could, use his athleticism to go out and get stops and get buckets. If he can just stay healthy and maybe actually get on the court a little bit, I think the Pistons might have a good finding in Zaire Smith. And finally, at least the last known transaction, prior to this video being made, the Pistons recently acquired Wayne Ellington off of waivers on a 1-year, $2.6 million deal. Ellington, he's a career 37% shooter from 3. I doubt he'll be asked to do much else other than that for the Pistons. So that's that. So overall synopsis of the Pistons offseason. I think they succeeded in getting a lot more youth and star potential into their lineup and roster. They now have guys like Killian Hayes, they have Josh Jackson, they have Zaire Smith. All those guys have potential to maybe one day come close to being an all-star caliber player. A few of them are more likely than others, but you get the point. Outside of that, they still have Derrick Rose, who I'm still under the assumption that they're going to trade him at some point this season as he's on the last year of his deal. Hopefully they can get some picks or other young guys for him, but I think Rose, well, he's still a great player, and that's why he has trade value, but I'm hoping that he'll be off the roster at some point this season. They also still have BG, who has been the centerpiece for a lot of trade talks, but nothing's happening there. So I think they might just end up keeping him for the duration of his contract, unfortunately. They now have some guys on some substantial contracts like Jerami Grant and Mason Plumlee. And again, they still have some other older pieces like Svi Mykhailiuk and Sekou Doumbouya, who was their first-round draft pick last season. All in all, this Pistons roster is definitely still not a contender by any means, but I think when you look at it compared to last season's, I think it's a huge step in the right direction for the Detroit Pistons. And after all of that, I think that's everything that Detroit has done this offseason. Again, sorry if this video is going to end up being a bit longer than a few of my other ones, but again, they're making deals frequently and often so far, and I just wanted to get through all of them, give you guys a wider view of what exactly the Pistons are trying to build here. And like I said, I think they're on the right path. So that's it for this video. Drop some comments down below on what you think about the Pistons off season so far. And while you're down there, maybe think about hitting the like button if you enjoyed this video or just this type of content in general. And as always, most importantly, thank you for watching.